Presidents. Everybody has a favorite. From George Washington to Joe Biden to Grover Cleveland to Grover Cleveland. They all have something that defines their presidency or their person, such as freeing the slaves like Abe Lincoln, or Teddy Roosevelt trust busting, or Kennedy dealing with the Bay of Pigs, or Obama overseeing the assassination of Osama bin Laden, or Donald Trump having very small hands and being orange. Oh, no, it's too much. I'm only a comedic genius. I'm only original. But in the midst of all these grandiose achievements, people fail to see the best president of all time, and his name was Calvin Coolidge. Now you may be thinking to yourself, does that president have Cool in his last name? And I can understand why you think that, but no, Cool was actually taken from the last name Coolidge. Schools don't really teach about Calvin Coolidge, and that just goes to show that schools are stupid. Wikipedia says that historical scholars rate Calvin Coolidge in the lower half of US presidents. And to me, that's baffling. Calvin Coolidge became president on August 2nd, 1923. Unlike most presidents, he didn't seek this position, but instead, it kind of sucked him out. It sought him out. Coolidge was elected as vice president with Warren G. Harding in 1929, and after several debacles such as the Teapot Dome scandal and just being an overall bad president, Warren G. Harding died, leaving Calvin Coolidge to be the new president. In his autobiography, Calvin says that he didn't have any desire to become president of the United States and only became vice president because Warren G. Harding had selected him. While he's known as Silent Cal, being said to be silent in 5 languages, he was really the driving force behind the Harding-Coolidge ballot. While Harding ran more of a front porch type campaign, Coolidge went from north to south, campaigning quietly, but still campaigning much more than Harding did. Compared to now, vice presidents didn't really have a lot of duties at the time, so what Calvin mainly did was go to dinner parties that the president was supposed to go to as sort of a stand-in. The problem with that was Calvin didn't really like Washington society, and understandably so. He seemed uncomfortable the whole time he was there, understandably so. And when questioned on why he kept coming to them because he was clearly uncomfortable, he said, and I quote, "Gotta eat somewhere." Fast forward to 1923. Calvin Coolidge is woken up by a phone call informing him that President Harding has died. Foregoing any sort of grandiose gesture, he's sworn in by his father, who is a notary public, and then goes back to bed. So now, Calvin Coolidge is president. Calvin Coolidge once said that one of the merits of his administration was the minding of his own business. So you might have gathered that Calvin Coolidge did astoundingly little. Now, that's not to say that he didn't do anything, but compared to what other presidents did, we had a president who marched the native people of this land over 2,000 miles to move them, some less because they died. We had a president who took all the Japanese American citizens and put them in concentration camps. We had a president who ordered drone strikes on hospitals. We had a president who ordered the usage of 2 experimental nuclear bombs that wiped out 2 separate cities on separate occasions, killing hundreds of thousands of innocent women and children and men, those guys too. But beyond atrocities, we have other massive expenditures like building a southern border wall or instituting the Federal Reserve, or bad choices like removing the gold backing from the US dollar. But not Calvin. He was very deliberate in almost everything he did, once quoting that it is more important to kill bad bills than pass good ones. What Coolidge mainly focused on was reducing government power, which after World War I was massive. At the time, federal income tax rates could be as high as 73%, and that was reduced down to 46% at the highest. Reducing the tax rate allowed for more success in the private sector because there was less constriction from having to pay taxes. So people in the private sector made more, and because math, more money was actually taken into the federal government even though the tax rate was much, much lower. George H.W. Bush referred to this as voodoo economics, but he's an idiot. And he doesn't know what he's talking about. He didn't know, and now he's dead. Because of Coolidge's economic policy, he ushered in the Roaring '20s, which, although it didn't last long, was a period of great success. Some people blame him for the stock market crash in 1929 because he allowed for such a massive upswing in our economy, which was rapidly becoming laissez-faire. If you don't know what laissez-faire means, it means leave it alone, because he left it alone. But a large reason that you don't hear him cited as a cause of the Great Depression was because he wasn't a cause of the Great Depression. Allowing for economic freedoms is by no means a cause for economic strife, unless of course you take those freedoms away. Thank you, Herbert Hoover, you clown. But Coolidge did do things that weren't economic deregulation. That were still very good things, such as he gave all Native Americans citizenship into the United States. An interesting side note, Calvin Coolidge was surprisingly not racist for being a politician in the 1920s, like very not racist, impressively so. He was a major advocate for civil rights, not just in the sense of the law, but treatment of people as a whole. He's on record berating a group of politicians who were attempting to keep a black person from running for Congress. Racism was still cool at the time, so he didn't win, but like, Coolidge tried. Coolidge also fought to make lynching a federal crime because, although it was a crime in states, not all states enforced it. Of course, Congress would not pass this because they were politicians, which were worse than the general public, and the general public kind of thought it was cool to be racist at the time. So Coolidge also cut government spending and laxed tariffs, which both led to economic booms. Off to the side of the United States, Germany had been struggling with debt ever since World War I because it had been a big old bully in World War I, and now it's its turn to be bullied, so it had to give its lunch money / livelihood money to other countries. So Germany was struggling economically, and Coolidge really wasn't inclined to do much about it. But after seeing the extent of their economic crisis, was willing to cut a deal with them in repaying that debt, and it led to a major economic boom in Germany, comparatively, because they were dirt poor, and any economic boom is major for that. While this wasn't able to stop the events of World War II, which was largely due to the debt that Germany had accumulated, it was able to cushion the economic fallout of Germany and very likely saved a few of the starving lives there. 1928 rolled around and it was time for the new election cycle. Everyone expected that Calvin Coolidge would be running again in 1928, but not Calvin. A year or so prior, Calvin Coolidge's son, Calvin Coolidge Jr., had died from a blister on his toe that he got playing tennis in the lawn of the White House. Now, Coolidge sort of blamed himself for this. In his autobiography, he wrote that he had decided to run for that second term, and had he not run for that second term, his son would have never gotten that blister on his toe playing in the White House lawn. Calvin's father died not long after, and Coolidge kind of blamed himself for this as well, crediting the stress of being the father of a president for his early death. Calvin began looking at the effects of his being president on his family and those close to him. Although he doesn't list this as one of his reasons for not running in 1928, it is a catalyst for it. Calvin himself thought that it was too much power for one man to hold, especially for such a length of time. And if he was to run just for the sake of running, he didn't deserve to have the presidency. In his autobiography, he says that it is difficult for men in high office to avoid the malady of self-delusion. He understood that those who seek power are the ones that shouldn't have it. And that's something I learned from Crea in Knights of the Old Republic too. But Calvin Coolidge figured it out all by himself. So he's ahead of his time. So Coolidge has stepped back from the presidential election, but the public still wants him very desperately. They've thrived under the Coolidge presidency. His exact statement was, "I do not choose to run for president in 1928. There's rumors that he won't run again, but he will still allow himself to be drafted in. This is not true. Coolidge did not want to be president. So Calvin Coolidge steps back from the presidency, and the nation is forced to choose another president. Quite poorly, if I do say so myself. They chose Herbert Hoover. Calvin Coolidge himself disparaged the decision, saying that Herbert Hoover had given him much advice over the years, and all of it was bad. He often referred to him as Boy Wonder because he believed so heavily in the powers of federal government and state influence over the private lives of American citizens and influence over the economy as a whole. The polar opposite actions of Herbert Hoover in office helped create and sustain the Great Depression and likely still affects us today. In 1933, Calvin Coolidge was approached by God himself in a chariot of fire and brought up into the heavens. Not to die as a mortal man, you can still see him in the night sky as the Coolidge constellation. In 1933, Calvin Coolidge died suddenly of coronary thrombosis.
Shortly before his death, he confided in a friend of his that he felt he no longer fit with the times. Well, maybe that's true, but maybe he never did.
Calvin Coolidge was a man of integrity, which is very rare in the political world. He wasn't self-serving, and he felt the full responsibility of the Oval Office. So yes, Calvin didn't fit with the times, but perhaps he should. If we had more presidents like Calvin Coolidge, honest men, or women, I didn't really feel like reshooting this, but those guys too, who didn't overstep their bounds, I believe our country would be in a much better state than it is today. There's an old legend about Calvin Coolidge, and it's disputed whether or not it's true. He and his wife had this lady over for dinner. She bet that she could get Calvin to speak more than 2 words. Calvin looked up at her and said, "You lose." So when it comes to all the other presidents, there's really only one thing to say. That is a dumb way to end a video. Thank you all for watching. I've really enjoyed the past 2 of these that I've made. Pretty cool to learn stuff about historical figures I didn't really pay attention to before. But I don't have to do historical stuff. I'm a very small channel, so I can be pretty freeform. If you want to see a video essay on something cool, just comment and I might do it. I might do that. Okay, bye.